I need your deck in 20 minutes or I'll just use Greg's. Dave barked from across the open office, like I was a temp he could bark at, not the one who had cleaned up every single one of his last-minute disasters for the past 6 years. I had barely swallowed my first sip of burnt breakroom coffee before the adrenaline hit my chest like a hammer. Same routine, different Monday. He didn't ask. He never asked. Just demanded, dumped, and disappeared like a magician who hated applause. I opened the file he sent. A jumbled mess of bullet points and stale buzzwords that hadn't been updated since our last failed pitch to Magellan Tech. Innovative synergy? Seriously? It looked like ChatGPT from 2018 wrote it during a blackout. So I started doing what I always did, fixing what he broke, polishing what he'd pretended to build, and preparing another masterpiece that would have his name slapped on the front slide and mine buried somewhere in the metadata, if I was lucky. And while I'm breathing fire here, quick favor. If you're enjoying the story so far, hit that like button and subscribe. Seriously, 97% of you listen without subscribing, and it means the world to the team. Keeps the stories rolling and the coffee cup full. Back to the deck. It was for the quarterly pipeline review. The execs were expecting clean projections, lead tracking, churn analysis, and some kind of forward-looking strategy for B2B. But Greg's version had 14 slides about our logo redesign and a bar graph with no labels. Dave had no idea what he was doing. And worse, he didn't care. That's what people like me were for. Behind-the-scenes elves, cleaning up the digital crumbs while he played wizard at the table. 6 years in that role. Not complaining. I was good at it. I knew how to dissect messy CRM reports, spot patterns in our cold lead lists, and build client touchpoint strategies that actually worked. I'd saved our bacon more than once, like when our biggest software partner nearly pulled out after Dave skipped a follow-up call. I quietly flew to Austin, took the meeting myself, and landed a 2-year renewal with upgraded tiers. Dave never even said thank you. Just posted about team wins on LinkedIn while I booked my own economy flight back home. People called me steady, reliable, one of those behind-the-curtain types. At first, it felt like praise. I didn't want to be flashy, didn't need a spotlight. But over time, those compliments calcified into something smaller, like a polite way of saying, "You're not leadership material." I watched others move up, louder voices, messier track records, fancier resumes. I watched them take credit for ideas they half understood and sit in rooms I never got invited to. The director of BizDev role opened up last spring. I waited. I reread the internal email 3 times. Open to internal applicants. So I applied. Crafted a careful write-up of my experience, attached performance summaries, even included my go-to-market pipeline enhancements from the last 2 quarters. The meeting with Dave was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I remember because I actually put on makeup that day. Not much, just enough to feel like I was showing up as someone who mattered. He didn't even close the door, just leaned on the edge of my desk like a high school principal catching you doodling. "Listen," he said with that patronizing half-smile. "You're really valuable, okay? But you're not leadership material. You're a great worker, reliable. But leadership takes presence, command. You're more of a behind-the-scenes person. That's not a bad thing." The way he said, "not a bad thing," made me want to fold in half. I nodded. Didn't argue. What was the point? I'd seen what happened to women who pushed back in this place. They got labeled difficult or not collaborative, and then they got quietly benched. He tapped my shoulder. I shit you not, tapped my shoulder like I was a golden retriever who'd fetched a report. "Keep doing what you're doing. We couldn't run without you." That's when I knew. He was never going to see it. Not the hours, not the strategy, not the dozens of deals I'd salvaged in the shadows. I wasn't a threat. I wasn't a star. I was a tool. Disposable and dependable, and I was done pretending that was enough. The next day, they posted the short list on the internal portal like it was the Oscars. 5 names, all men, all louder than me. One of them, Greg, yes, PowerPoint Greg, once sent a sales proposal with the wrong company name on the front page. Another, Ethan, literally forgot to show up for a pitch last month and sent me in his place with 10 minutes notice and a shrug. I closed that deal while he was at Topgolf. And yet, there they were, celebrated, promoted, lined up like varsity starters while I sat on the bench with my color-coded pipeline metrics and a perfectly tuned conversion model no one bothered to read. I stared at the screen for a solid minute, not out of shock. That had left the building long ago. It was the dull, hollow recognition of a pattern, of the unspoken memo women like me get handed somewhere between year 4 and year forever. Be indispensable, but never irreplaceable. Be the glue, not the gold. Make things run smoother so someone else can drive. At the team meeting later that week, Dave stood by the whiteboard with his sleeves rolled up like he was solving world hunger. Big changes ahead, he said. We're restructuring to be more agile. Agile, that cursed word. Translation, titles shuffled, responsibilities doubled, recognition halved. And then he dropped it, the new BizDev org chart. It was a joke, a complete farce. They'd split the team across growth verticals, which was fancy speak for chaos. The new director? Ethan. The guy who thought CRM stood for Customer Refund Machine. Under him? Greg, Lauren, and 3 new hires I'd never even met. My name wasn't on the slide, at all, not even a dotted line. Sorry, Dave said afterward, not looking up from his phone. We thought you'd want to keep focusing on sales ops. It's your strength. Sales ops. The dumping ground for anything too messy for the golden boys to handle. The janitor closet of strategy, where good ideas go to get buried under 12 layers of tracking spreadsheets. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a bottle of Pinot and my laptop open to my old strategy decks. Not Dave's versions, mine. The ones with clean structures, tiered market segmentation, lead prioritization flowcharts, and the abandoned proposal for a new CRM rollout. I reread emails I'd written but never sent. Notes I'd drafted for clients who thought Dave was their miracle worker. I kept waiting to feel angry, to boil over, but all I felt was numb, like I'd already been fading from the picture, and I was the last one to notice. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It's quiet, which means you can think. Plan. Watch the room without anyone watching you back. So I made a list. Not a petty list, not some revenge fantasy, a practical one. I wrote down every account I'd salvaged, every strategy I'd authored, every client who called me directly because they didn't trust the suits. Then I started flagging what Dave hadn't done, like update the segment forecast in 6 weeks, or follow up on the Johnson deal, or notice that our conversion rate from cold outreach had tanked 14% because the new hires were too green to even spell our product name right. By midnight, I had more than a list. I had leverage, but leverage only matters if you know where to apply it, and I had just the place in mind. I smiled, but something inside me went still. He didn't even bother reading past slide 4. Just nodded like he'd written the damn thing himself and wandered off to his next call, already practicing his fake humble chuckle for the C-suite. This was the quarterly review, the one where execs either got funding or got grilled. The pipeline deck wasn't just a visual aid, it was a crystal ball. It set the tone for the next 3 months, determined resource allocation, and, if done right, could unlock support from Marcus Lynn's investment team. Everyone knew Marcus had the ear of the board. What most people didn't know is that I'd met him twice before, both times because Dave forgot something important. The first was at a dinner with our European logistics partner, where Dave butchered the presentation so badly that Marcus pulled me aside afterward to ask if we had a contingency strategy. I gave him a napkin sketch of a 3-tiered approach I'd been toying with. He kept the napkin. The second time, we crossed paths after a client call I handled solo when Dave was off-grid in Cabo. Marcus said he appreciated the follow-through. I smiled, said it was a team effort. He gave me that look smart people give when they know you're lying out of professionalism. So yeah, when I handed off the deck this time, it wasn't a handoff. It was a test. I stayed late that night, not because I had to. Everything was already done. But I couldn't sleep. I watched the recording of the last quarterly meeting, watched how Marcus asked questions no one was ready for, how Dave danced around conversion decay by overpromising market expansion. I rewatched my slides, ran the models again. Everything held. Slide 7 was the real grenade. I'd buried it mid-deck under the section titled Emerging Opportunity Channels. It showed a 19.4% recovery rate in cold segments we'd written off as dead weight. I'd built a predictive model that filtered lead reactivation based on historical cross-sector success. It wasn't just theory. I'd tested it live on a subset of accounts. It worked. And it had the potential to revive a revenue stream we abandoned last quarter when Greg labeled it non-viable because he didn't know how to segment by source date. But Dave wouldn't understand that. He wouldn't even notice it. What he would do is present it like it was his own epiphany, toss in a few buzzwords, and let the execs pat him on the back while I watched from the glass wall outside the conference room. So I made a decision. I stripped out the metadata from the deck, removed my initials, cleared the auto-saved comments, scrubbed it clean of attribution. Then I exported a separate copy, no logos, no identifying markers, just content, and saved it to my personal drive, not to be shady, to be ready. Because in this game, ideas don't get you promoted. Visibility does. And Dave? He was about to have mine. I didn't even wait to see the replay of the meeting. I already knew how it went. Dave walked out of the boardroom grinning like he'd just cured cancer with a bar chart. Greg high-fived him. I overheard Ethan whispering something about finally getting traction in dead segments. My segment. My model. My recovery rates. It was like watching a rerun of a show where I wasn't even a character, just a damn scriptwriter who didn't get listed in the credits. By the time I left the office, the parking lot was dark and my car was the only one left in the back row. I sat behind the wheel with my phone in one hand and my badge still clipped to my blazer. My stomach was buzzing. Not nerves, not sadness, something sharper. I'd waited years for someone to notice what I brought to the table. And they did, just not the me part. So I found the last business card I had from that client dinner a year ago. Marcus Lynn, managing partner. I didn't know if the number was still active or if I'd get some assistant screening calls, but I hit call before I could talk myself out of it. He picked up on the second ring. Marcus Lynn, he said, calm and clear. Hi, We've met a couple times. I'm with Ronstead, the sales strategist. I helped you with the Asura Tech expansion deck last spring. Pause. Oh, yeah, you were the one who flagged their retention bleed. That was solid work. I exhaled, relieved he remembered. I have something, a framework. It's raw, no polish, no company branding, but it's working. Dave presented a version of it today, got a standing ovation. And you're telling me because he didn't write it. I did. Silence, then send it. So I did. Not the polished one, not the corporate version with all the fluff Dave insisted on. I sent the bones, the raw analysis, the recovery model, the phased GTM rollout, the account tiering schema. I even included the optional activation paths for dormant leads based on behavioral clustering, something I never dared bring up in internal reviews because someone like Ethan would just call it too academic. I didn't sleep that night. Kept checking my inbox like I was back in college, waiting for job offers that never came. At 6:42 a.m., a response landed. Subject, let's talk. No greeting, no sign-off, just a meeting link and a time, 11:30 a.m. I walked into the office that day like nothing had changed, like I wasn't carrying a Molotov cocktail of strategy in my bag and waiting to see where it might land. Dave greeted me with that same smug nod. Good work on the deck. Made me look like a rock star. I just smiled. Happy to help. Because no one was listening before. But Marcus? Marcus was wide awake. His office sat on the 29th floor of a downtown tower with more glass than sense. I'd walked past that building 100 times and never once thought I'd be headed inside for anything but a delivery. But there I was, gripping my laptop bag like a lifeline, heart pounding through my blouse like it was trying to tap out Morse code. I kept hearing his voice from the call in my head. Lunch, my office, be on time. Not an invitation, an audition. The receptionist didn't ask for my name, just pointed. End of the hall, last door on the left. Marcus Lynn's office was all clean lines and no clutter, the kind of place where ideas had to earn their space. No framed golf photos, no ego trophies, just a long walnut table, a matte black monitor, and a tray with 2 sandwiches and 2 bottles of sparkling water. He was already seated, scrolling through something on a tablet. He didn't look up. Sit, he said, still reading. I did. He tapped the screen, flipped it toward me. It was my model. Or at least the version I sent him. He'd annotated it, color-coded conversion paths, added projections. He'd spent time on it. Real time. This you? Yes. You're sure? I smiled, tight. Unless someone else at Ronstead is quietly rebuilding our pipeline in secret, yeah, it's me. He looked up for the first time. There was no softness in his face, just calculation. You realize this contradicts your VP's position from Q2. He told us cold leads were bleeding money. You're saying they're not just viable, they're profitable. I'm saying we're sitting on a recovery channel with a 19% return potential, but no one wants to touch it because it doesn't look sexy on a slide, or because Dave doesn't understand segment lifecycle triggers. He let that hang in the air, then said, "Why didn't you present this yourself?" I laughed once. Dry. Because I'm an analyst. I'm not leadership material. At least that's the official verdict. He leaned back, folding his arms. That so? I shrugged. Apparently, I don't have presence. Marcus tapped his thumb against his chin, thinking. You know what I see when I read this? No, I said honestly. Precision, patience, pattern recognition. You didn't just build a recovery model. You built a system that scales. I've seen a dozen B2B firms drown because their sales teams can't think past the quarter. This, he said, tapping the tablet, thinks ahead. He slid a folder across the table. This is a draft proposal. We're reorganizing the BizDev structure across several portfolio companies. One of them is taking over Ronsted's segment starting next month. I need someone to architect the transition strategy. Me? I asked, before I could stop myself. He nodded. Not because you're flashy, not because you're a rock star, but because you see what others miss, and you don't flinch when they take credit for it. I opened the folder. It wasn't just a strategy outline, it was a role, a department, a chance to build something from the bones up. What do you say? He asked. I looked up. My voice was calm. Let's start with lunch. Dave's voice bounced off the office walls like a rubber ball dipped in ego and cheap cologne. I said, where are the updated metrics? Who has the damn Q3 outreach lists? Phones froze mid-air, heads turned. He was doing his usual alpha male meltdown in front of the interns, puffed up like a rooster that just realized the henhouse had Wi-Fi. What he didn't know was that I wasn't even in the building. I was 3 floors above him in another firm's downtown suite, laptop open, whiteboarding an end-to-end rollout plan for a sales infrastructure he didn't even know existed yet. My out-of-office reply was set. PTO through Friday. Please contact Greg for urgent matters. Greg, who couldn't spell churn rate without autocorrect. Officially, I was decompressing. Unofficially, I was building an empire from the blueprint Marcus and I had scribbled on a lunch napkin, now evolving into a multi-tiered B2B integration that would be introduced to 30 partners at the next summit. And I wasn't alone. 2 other directors sat with us, one from a logistics AI startup, another from a marketing firm that recently merged into Marcus's fund. They weren't just peers. They were future collaborators. And I could tell by the second day that they didn't see me as some junior analyst taking notes. They saw me as an architect. I'd earned that. We spent hours in the glass-walled conference room, building tiered segmentation layers and dynamic lead prioritization algorithms. I sketched out onboarding frameworks, rewrote the nurturing logic, built multi-stage activation plans based on buyer behaviors that Ronsted had ignored for 2 years straight. And the numbers? Staggering. Marcus walked in halfway through my breakdown of conversion lag versus lead source relevance and just stood there, arms folded, watching like he was already writing the press release in his head. At the end of our 3rd day, he didn't make a speech. He didn't do the dramatic, everyone raise your glasses move that people like Dave love to mimic. He just slid a folder across the table. Inside, a provisional title, a reporting structure, a budget, and a hand-signed letter of intent. Head of Business Development, cross-portfolio integration. Me. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Maybe because I wasn't used to seeing my name at the top of anything. Or maybe because, for the first time in years, the work I'd buried behind the scenes was sitting out in full view. No watermark needed. I thought I wasn't the type, I said, more to myself than him. Marcus gave a half smile and leaned back. You're not. You don't chase attention. You don't fake urgency. You think. You build. And you've never once tried to sell me something that wasn't ready. That's why it'll work. I closed the folder. And Ronsted? We're finalizing the restructure, he said. They'll be informed Monday, but your team won't report through them anymore. You'll report to me. I took a breath. Slow, grounding. then nodded. All right, I said. Let's build it right this time. The room went dead silent, like someone had unplugged the oxygen. You could hear the click of Marcus's shoes against the polished floor and the awkward throat clearing from someone in the back who clearly wished they'd taken this meeting over Zoom. Dave was frozen mid-sentence, half turned toward the screen, one hand raised like he was waiting for applause that never came. Marcus didn't wait for permission. I'll keep this brief, he said, cool and clipped. There's been a shift in strategic direction. Effective immediately, we're consolidating all business development operations under a new cross-portfolio initiative. The CEO leaned forward. Marcus, this wasn't flagged. It's been in motion for a while, Marcus cut in. You'll find the memo in your inbox within the hour. For now, I'd like to introduce your new head of business development. He turned toward the open doorway. I walked in. Not rushed. Not triumphant. Just calm. Deliberate, like I'd been here all along, waiting for the room to catch up. There was a full second of dead air before the first sound broke it. Dave's jaw literally snapping shut. The sound was small, almost comical, but the look on his face, that was art. Pale, confused, something between indigestion and existential crisis. Hi, everyone, I said softly, offering a nod to the front row, where Greg looked like he might vomit into his branded notebook. The CEO blinked. Wait, her? She was PTO, I offered with a pleasant smile. But I'm back now. Marcus gestured to the screen. We'll be reviewing the actual strategy in a moment. But first, I'd like to reset the conversation. The version of the deck you've seen? It's outdated. What we'll walk through today is the actual version, the one that worked. Dave tried to speak. Hold on. This meeting was for the quarterly roadmap. It still is, Marcus said. Only now we're using the roadmap built by the person who actually understood the terrain. I sat down across from Dave, not across the room, across the table. Direct line of sight. He couldn't avoid it. And I didn't flinch. Just watched him squirm in the same chair he'd once told me wasn't for my level. The projector screen went dark as Marcus nodded to the tech lead. Cue the new deck. Dave leaned toward the CEO, whispering frantically, trying to salvage whatever sliver of control he thought he had left. But it was over. The narrative had shifted, and everyone in that room felt it. I didn't say much after that. Just flipped open my laptop, synced my notes, and waited. Let him sweat. Let him stammer. I'd waited years for a seat at this table. Now it was mine. The screen lit up with my slides, not Dave's butchered version, not the one he had polished with cliches and Q3 energy, but mine, raw, detailed, uncut. The deck I'd built in silence while he was busy trying to look important. The title page didn't say Ronstead. It said, L2 Strategic Advisory, Marcus's firm. And just beneath that, in the corner, lead, my name. The room didn't gasp. No one clapped. It was better than that. They leaned forward. The kind of lean that only happens when people know they're about to learn something they should have known weeks ago. Slide 1, I began, steady as stone. Segment reclassification based on behavioral clustering. We've been discarding leads that show late-stage engagement triggers because the CRM is tagging them as stale based on first touch, not final behavior. Dave opened his mouth again, desperate. We were already looking into that. No, Marcus said flatly. You said, and I quote, those channels are dead weight. Yet this model recovered 19% of those dead leads with zero added cost. Greg looked like he was trying to disappear into his chair. Slide 2, I continued, conversion sequencing. By restructuring the cold touch cadence to prioritize vertical affinity before urgency, we saw a 12% lift in engagement within 6 days. Ethan, who'd been tapping his pen like he had a train to catch, finally sat still. I flipped through the next 4 slides, projections, retention maps, cross-market activation layers. Every metric backed by live test data from my original pilot, all buried under Ronsted's noise until now. Dave tried again. We worked as a team. There was collaboration. No one's questioning that, Marcus replied, his tone surgical. But collaboration implies equal contribution. And I've reviewed the logs. All version histories. Only one name appears consistently. Hers. That shut him up. The CEO, to his credit, didn't try to spin. He just adjusted his glasses, stared at the screen, and muttered, "We need to realign. Schedule something this week." It wasn't said with flair. No dramatic pause. Just a business decision. A pivot. The kind that makes or breaks careers. I kept going, walked them through the 12-month expansion plan, the phased onboarding model for new hires, the client reactivation funnel. I didn't rush. I didn't grandstand. I just laid it out clean, sharp, like I always had. Only now, people listened. When I finished, Marcus stood. That's the new foundation. The partners have already signed off. We'll be deploying across 3 verticals starting Q1. She'll lead. Dave didn't say a word. His hands were clasped together on the table, knuckles white. His usual condescension was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen from him in 6 years. Fear. I closed my laptop. No bow, no speech. The message had already been received. He stood there like a mannequin someone forgot to put away, still wearing that too tight blazer and the brittle confidence that used to fill entire rooms. His eyes darted to the doorway like he was expecting Marcus to reappear and reverse everything. But this wasn't a dream. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the moment he'd spent years making sure would never come. And now it was here, and I was still standing. I unplugged the HDMI cord with the same care I used to wrap up his half-baked demos. The air still smelled faintly of cheap cologne, coffee, and panic. Papers rustled as someone packed up their notes a few chairs away, but no one said anything to him, not even Greg. They just gave him that sideways glance, the one you give someone who's no longer in charge but hasn't figured it out yet. He took a step toward me. I didn't know. I raised a hand. Not angry, just done. Don't. His mouth opened again, and I saw him digging for a phrase. Something to save face, something to play humble, maybe even thanks. But the time for that had expired. Years ago. I picked up my notebook and tucked it under my arm. Then I turned to him, dead calm. "Want me to grab you a coffee?" I asked, tilting my head. "Or can you handle it yourself?" He blinked, stunned. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out, slow and quiet, past the room where I used to sit and watch the same 5 people get promoted over and over for making messes I cleaned up. Past the desk where I'd sat for 6 years with a view of a filing cabinet and 0 line of sight to the conference room I now owned. Past the whiteboard where Dave once wrote, "Team Oz Trust, Energy, Accountability, Momentum," like it meant anything to anyone besides himself. People looked up as I passed, some with recognition, some with a little shame. A few gave small nods, not pity, not awe, but respect. The kind that only shows up after silence breaks. I walked into my new office, glass walls, real door, my name already printed on the calendar for 3 upcoming summits. I set my notebook down, took off my blazer, and opened my laptop. The logo on the screen didn't look any different than it had last week. But I did. I wasn't background noise anymore. I was the damn signal.